Good afternoon, Ajahn. It's my honor today to present my thesis proposal with the title Effects of High-Intensity Inspiratory Muscle Training in Patients with Heart Failure with Mildly Reduced and Preserved Ejection Fraction, a randomized controlled trial. The outline that I would like to cover today includes introduction and literature review, depth of knowledge, research questions, research methodology, and statistical analysis. I'll start off with introduction and literature review. Heart failure is a common condition which is a big problem worldwide. The prevalence of heart failure in general population is 1 to 3%. It means that over 240 million people were living with heart failure in 2022. And the prevalence of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is increasing. If you look at the mortality, you could see that over half of heart failure patients die within 5 years. The annual health care cost for heart failure is up to 25,000 euro per year, or over 900 Thai baht. Let's take a look in Thailand. Heart failure prevalence was estimated to be 0.4%. In Thailand, the heart failure hospitalization still increases. The annual healthcare cost per patient was 120,000 Thai baht, and hospitalized heart failure care costs were over 250,000 Thai baht. As you may know that heart failure is a big problem, so let's move on the classification of heart failure. Heart failure can be classified into 3 types: heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, heart failure with mildly reduced and reduced ejection fraction. Heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is defined as the presence of symptoms and signs, plus left ventricular ejection fraction or LVEF equal or greater than 50%, plus evidence of cardiac structural and functional abnormalities addressed or with exercise. The definition of heart failure with mildly reduced ejection fraction is similar, except the LVEF is in between 40 and 50%. Let's take a closer look at heart failure with preserved and mildly reduced ejection fraction. In this figure, on the left-hand graph, the vertical axis shows the proportions of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. The x-axis represents the years from 1986 to 2002. You could see that the trend of the prevalence of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction increased over time. On the right graph, the x-axis, the y-axis captures the number of admissions. You can see that the red line shows the number of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction continue increase. On the other hand, the number of heart failure with reduced ejection fraction seems to be the same. This is a cohort of 40,000 patients with heart failure, and you can see that over half of patients with heart failure were mildly reduced and preserved ejection fraction. The 5 years mortality rate of those patients were not different from the heart failure patients with reduced ejection fraction. And again, 5-year mortality rate in this cohort was 75%, and the mortality in readmission group was up to 97%. I'll focus more on about exercise intolerance, which is considered as the primary symptoms of heart failure. So, what is exercise intolerance? It is defined as an impairment in the capacity to perform physical activities, accompanied by symptoms and of significant dyspnea and fatigue, and is represented with reduced oxygen consumption. It could be explained by diminished capacity of cardiovascular system to supply oxygen and inability of the skeletal muscles to utilize oxygen, or both. Let's take a look deeper in the pathophysiological abnormalities contributes to the clinical manifestation of heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. Risk factors such as multi-morbidity, aging, obesity, physical inactivity, and systemic inflammation lead to downstream of multi-organ dysfunction, fatigue, cardiac dysfunction, and skeletal muscle myopathy, result in inspiratory muscle weakness and exercise intolerance. Indeed, exercise capacity could reduce could be reduced by 35% in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction compared with healthy age and sex-matched control subjects. So, how to measure exercise capacity? There are two most common tests to measure exercise capacity. Firstly, the cardiopulmonary exercise test, or CPAT. It is a diagnostic test that combines exercise with measurements of various physiological parameters to evaluate cardiovascular and respiratory function during physical exertion. During a CPAT, the individual typically performs incremental exercise on a treadmill or stationary bicycle while connected to monitoring devices to track key parameters such as heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen consumption, carbon dioxide production, respiratory rate, and ventilation. Additionally, an electrocardiogram may be used to monitor heart electrical activities. Peak oxygen consumption is a measurement of maximum amount of oxygen an individual can utilize during cardiopulmonary exercise, and it is considered as an important indicator of cardiovascular fitness and aerobic capacity. The second test is 6-minute walk test. It is a simple test which measures the distance of an individual can walk in 6 minutes on a flat surface. 6-minute walk test provides some information about the distance, person's exertion, and the adaptation of their cardiopulmonary system during and after the test. The evidence of exercise intolerance in patients with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is shown in this figure. Many activities of daily living, such as dressing, making bed, or walking, that are trivial for healthy adults to perform but require near maximal effort for patients with heart failure. The table shows some prognostic value of exercise intolerance. For example, the patients with VO2 peak less than 14 millimeter per kilogram per minute will have higher risk of hospitalization, or with every 10% decrease of predicted VO2 peak, patients will have over 30% higher risk of hospitalization and mortality. And those who have the results of 6-minute walk test less than 300 meters will have high risk of mortality. In heart failure patients, it is considered that inspiratory muscle weakness as a key contributor of exercise intolerance. Let's take a look deeply on the mechanism responsible for the reduce of functional capacity. The maladaptation of right left heart, as well as the vascular and skeletal muscle makes the abnormality of ins inspiratory muscle, including respiratory muscle atrophy, change in muscle fiber types, muscle metabolic reflex, reduced oxidative capacity, ventilation inefficiency, and physical deconditioning. And as a result, the peak oxygen consumption is reduced. The prevalence of inspiratory muscle weakness in heart failure is 40 to 50%, and this figure in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is 30 to 40%. Inspiratory muscle weakness is defined as maximal inspiratory pressure, or MIP, less than 70% of predicted value. MIP, or maximal inspiratory pressure, is a measurement used to assess the strength and function of inspiratory muscle, particularly the diaphragm. To assess MIP, patients will be instructed to inhale forcefully at residual volume to against an occluded airway of a digital device like this picture. And the MIP will be shown in a number and presented as a graph. Inspiratory muscle weakness is a poor prognostic factor in heart failure. The figure indicates that patients with inspiratory muscle weakness had a significant lower survival rate than those without inspiratory muscle weakness in both heart failure with reduced and preserved ejection fraction. So let's find the solution for inspiratory muscle weakness. An effective way to strengthen respiratory muscle in this group of patients is respiratory muscle training. In this method, inspiratory muscle training with resistance training is of great concern because inspiratory muscle inspiration is generally an active progress and it plays a vital role in oxygen uptake efficiency. In addition, the resistance training is user-friendly and more cost-effective than other devices. The inspirator muscle training device will provide a stable resistance while inhalation. Patients need to inhale strong enough to get over that threshold. In the mechanism, inspirator muscle training acts directly on the respiratory muscle, including diaphragm and intercostal muscle. Inspirator muscle training in heart failure patients could improve inspirator muscle endurance, increase exertion capacity, alleviate metabolic reflex, enhance diaphragm thickness, change muscle fiber types, and improve ventilatory efficacy. By that way, inspirator muscle training improves functional capacity in heart failure patients. A pressure threshold device will be used in this study. It includes 11 adjustable levels of resistance corresponding to the resistance from 17 to 98 centimeter water. In order to gain expected outcome, the inspirator muscle training program will be set based on three components: intensity, frequency, and duration. The intensity depends on the percentage of maximal inspiratory pressure and divided to high intensity, moderate intensity, and low intensity. Until now, only 2 trials were performed to evaluate the efficacy of inspirator muscle training in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. But both studies used low to moderate intensity. In addition, they use unblinded trial design, small sample size, and lack of report of the compliance to home-based in IMT program. And an interesting finding is no previous study evaluate effects of IMT in heart failure with mildly reduced ejection fraction. So the gap of knowledge is that there have been no studies conducted to evaluate the effects of and safety of high-intensity IMT on patients with heart failure with mildly reduced and preserved ejection fraction. Based on the current evidence, we propose two new research questions. First of all, does the home-based high-intensity IMT program increase VO2 peak from baseline more than that in sham controls in patients with heart failure with mildly reduced and preserved ejection fraction? And the second question is the home-based high-intensity IMT program safe? And does this improve MIP, 6-minute walking distance, quality of life, and echocardiographic diastolic parameters?